Hello and welcome to the Kubernetes community meeting. Today is May the 2nd, and that is a Thursday. And fun tip for the week, it is 18 days until KubeCon EU in Barcelona. So if you're going to be making it there, very excited to see you all. Today we have a packed agenda. So I'll go through that in just a moment. I am Lachlan Evenson. I represent SIG PM in the Kubernetes community, and I'm also on the 1.15 release team serving as a lead shadow. So that's me. Welcome again, and it's great to have you here. Few orders of business first. This meeting is being recorded and streamed live to YouTube, and we're all under the Kubernetes Code of Conduct, which says treat each other with respect. So be mindful of your conversations as they are being streamed live to the internet. Also, if you could mute, that would be greatly appreciated if you're not talking, obviously. So please try and watch the mute button to give folks full attention for those people that are talking. I have thrown the link in the Zoom chat here for the agenda. If you'd like to pull that up, feel free to take a look. And I'll just quickly zoom through the agenda. We'll take a look at what's on there, and then we'll just pass it, get going here. So we have a demo up first, then we get the release updates from
Hey guys, thanks for having me. I'm going to share my screen here really quick, and today I'm going to be demoing KDash, which is a alternative Kubernetes dashboard. I've just got a small handful of slides, but I'd actually like to start with a demo. This is KDash, and just making sure my screen is shared. Yep, everyone can see okay? Good. So the first thing I want to show here is that KDash has native built-in integration with IDC, so that if you want to use OIDC to log into your cluster, there's no proxies or authenticating proxies or anything you have to put in front of it. You just can configure it with a couple environment variables, and then that just works out of the box. And what you can see here is the dashboard, and we have a couple, or the main screen. And we've got a couple charts here that show you some basic information about the status of your cluster, how much CPU usage you're having and how much RAM usage is going on, both from a node perspective as well as a pod perspective, where it's showing you the actual use versus your reservation. So you can see here, I've got this set up to be incorrectly configured, and you can see at a glance there that I'm using way more RAM than I have reserved. That could be potentially leading to some problems in my cluster, so you can see that at a glance. And then down here you can see the your events. So that's everything that's happened in your cluster. It's coming from the events API, and you can see at a glance what has happened recently. You've got a whole slew of things you can see here. You've got some nodes and namespaces and workloads. I'm going to hop over to a namespace really quick. And I'm going to move this Zoom window that's right over the top of what I want to click. And you can see my namespaces, and I can go into one of these. And here again, you get the same charts again, but now you can see that they're in the context of this namespace. So again, I can see in this namespace what is my pod CPU usage and my RAM usage. And I don't know if you saw those numbers update there in real time. All of KDash is based around using the Kubernetes streaming APIs or their WebSocket APIs. So everything here updates in real time. There's no need to sort of refresh pages to see what the current status of things is. And again, here you can see some basic information about the namespace, as well as all of the pods that are running in that namespace. And you can do your sorting by CPU usage, requested. You can see that I've got something here that's clearly using way more CPU than it was allocated. So that's definitely something I would want to look into if I were using this to manage my cluster. In addition, we're going to hop over here to workloads. So these you can see all the various deployments and replica sets and whatnot that I have going. And again, you can see Same thing, some charts telling you the health of things. I can type here to filter, everything you'd expect to see in a dashboard. But again, in real time, so we actually use this. This is one of the primary useful things that we use this for, is we'll frequently do, especially in our staging environment, a deploy the world, and you can come to this screen and watch things update in real time and get a real sense for how's that deployment rolling out, what's stuck, what's still waiting. And I can then obviously come in here, and again, for this particular deployment, I can see all the information about it. I can see the container and some of the information about that. I can see the replica set that it's currently under. I can see the one replica that I have here currently running. Any events for this pod would show up down here. I can also come in here and easily scale this. So if I said I wanted to maybe have 3 of these, I can just scale that. And again, you'll see real time right here, status of what's going on. You see those deploy, roll out. And again, immediately they show up here, and you can see the events down here that it's rolled out. In addition to that, you can, oops, scale that back really quick, sorry. You can also edit here. You can see all the YAML, the actual YAML for that. You can make changes and save them. In addition, it actually has context-aware documents. So it knows, I can come in here and see what actually is the API here, what are the various things that you're allowed to set, and get some descriptions of what those things are to make it easier to update your YAML. You can also come in and delete as well, which I don't actually want to do, so I'm going to say no thank you. In addition, so we have management of all the things you'd expect to see. So that was workload view, but here's a pod view. Same thing, I can see all the pods. And again, I can come in here and filter, and you'll see that these charts update in real time as I'm typing. This is now the charts based on just the couple things I'm viewing now. And again, sorting by the various things makes it really easy to see what might be not running the way you expect. There's also UI for all the sort of storage APIs, accounts, roles, bindings, secrets. Nice feature that I like here is it actually blurs this out instead of just hiding it, which makes it really easy to highlight and copy to my clipboard without showing people what the actual values are there. And in addition to that, there's also this where you can just come in and do apply. It's basically kube control apply here. So you can paste your YAML straight in here and go ahead and hide that. Make changes to your cluster that way as well. So that's the whirlwind tour. I'm assuming everyone's sort of seen a dashboard before, so I won't belabor too many points. But I will also show here that it's also fully responsive, so you can see it works just fine in a mobile view as well. And everything that I just showed actually works in mobile. So this has actually come in handy where I've been able to pull logs from a poorly behaving pod while I was away from my computer, out at the store, and could manage all of this remotely. And that's actually been really nice and come in handy a couple times. So other than that, I'll go through my presentation really quick. Looks like I'm okay on time. I've only got a very small handful of slides here. But so as you saw, KDash, it's full cluster management. It's real time. You don't have to refresh your page. Everything shows you the current status of things. It makes it easy to quickly visualize. It's got your CRUD, your scaling, your API, and the OIDC integration. Quick note about adoption, since I released this about a month ago, and since we're all nerds here, I thought I'd put that in the numbers in hex. Just kidding. I'll put them in something we can all do offhand, off the top of our heads. So I released this about a month and a half ago, maybe 2 months now. I posted something on Reddit about it. I got over 100 upvotes on that. I've had over 225 GitHub stars since then, getting 1 to 2 stars a day right now. I actually have a video on YouTube that is linked to from the GitHub page that sort of gives basically the same demo I just gave, and that's at about 3,000 views. And Docker Hub polls, I've had about little over 45,000 polls in the last 2 months here. So adoption so far has been better than I expected for the first, like I said, less than 2 months. But it's really encouraging to see that, especially the Reddit thing I found valuable. When I built this, I sandboxed myself or time boxed myself to not spending more than a month building it before I put it out to see if there would actually be any interest in it. So I built it in about 3 weeks of nights and weekends before I put something out there, and it's been really encouraging. So I've definitely continued development on it. So I'm going to do a reverse Q&A, actually. If anyone, I would love some feedback on, first, what's missing. I am fairly new to Kubernetes, and it hits all the pain points for our team, but obviously all teams, the thing I've learned quickly is all teams use Kubernetes differently. So what works for us may not work for other teams. So anything that would keep someone from using KDash, I would love to hear about, and so that we can start working on getting those things prioritized and in there. And lastly, being new to Kubernetes, I'm not sure of the best way to promote KDash. Like I said, I did a Reddit post. It was met very well, but I don't really know where to go from there. So other than that, here's some links to the GitHub and Docker Hub and my email address. If anyone wants to contact me, you can reach me there. Otherwise, I'm Herb Branson in the Kubernetes Slack channel. So I think that's everything I've got. I'd love to hear from everyone.
Thanks, Eric. We can open it up to questions. There was one question in the chat. What differentiates K8 from K/dashboard?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the primary one and kind of maybe the driving motivator for me in making it was that real time thing. When we do, like I said, we frequently do real time deployments, sort of deploy the world in our test environment, and having to sit there and refresh the page to see, is it done yet? Is it done yet? Is it done yet? Just seeing everything in real time is a big advantage. In addition, having the OIDC integration was really nice for us to not have to mess with setting something up in front of it. It makes it really easy to get this dashboard up and going and get authentication working quickly. And then it's integrated. One thing I didn't mention is we're using metrics server for all of the stats here. So I know the existing one is using Heapster. I believe that I'd heard that they're working on, and in this next release we'll probably upgrade to metrics server. But for us, Heapster is deprecated, and we didn't really want to install that and move that direction. So this was nice from that standpoint. But really, the real time is the primary driver and motivation behind building it.
Any other questions for Eric? No? Well, with that, thank you very much, Eric, for the fantastic demo.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so now we move on to release updates, and we have Claire on the line from 1.15 release lead.
Yes.
Claire.
Hello, everyone. We are now in week 4 of the Kubernetes release cycle for 1.15. Some things that happened this week: we had our second alpha released that happened on Monday. And then on Tuesday, we had our enhancements freeze. And then following that, we've gotten a couple of exception requests for enhancements. So going into enhancement freeze, we had about 43 tracked enhancements for 1.15. After enhancement freeze, it looks like that number has now dropped down to 35 enhancements. And of those 5, I believe there have already been, or of those 35, there have already been 5 approved exceptions, and that should be inclusive of them. Coming up next week, we're going to have our third alpha released on May 7th. And then also happening on May 7th, we will have the 1.11.0 jobs removed. And that is my update for this week. Any questions on how 1.15 is going?
No questions? Okay, fantastic. Thanks for the update, Claire. Very much appreciated. Okay, so now we move on to our KEP of the week. Now, the KEP of the week is actually revised IPv4, IPv6 dual stack KEP. Now, this may be funny because I actually wrote the KEP, but I didn't suggest that it be the KEP of the week. It was just coincidental. So let me just go through. I will share my screen very quickly. All right, let me know when you can see it. Okay, so it is on the enhancements, Kubernetes enhancements repo. It's pull request number 808. Now I'm just going to quickly go through this KEP. Let me pop it to something a little more readable. But the motivation behind this KEP was actually to create enable dual stack, so allow IPv4 v6 networking on both your pods and services inside Kubernetes. Because we have seen from the community a bunch of people asking, especially for large clusters or where there's IP address exhaustion, can we go forward with IPv6? So what this KEP proposes is a way forward to get dual stack. Now, dual stack means you run both IPv4 and v6 side by side, because IPv6 pure in Kubernetes has been there since about 1.9. But IPv4 and v6, which we refer to as dual stack, is a common migration path for people to run both at the same time and have that kind of experience. So this KEP is in provisional status at the moment. It's under review, and it has an exception for 1.15. It's actually a multi-release KEP in that we'll be adding functionality over many Kubernetes releases. But for the 1.15 release specifically, the functionality was to get multiple IP addresses on a pod, a v4 and a v6, and enable that networking, and allow nodes to have multiple CIDRs, so an IPv4 and an IPv6 CIDR. So that's the KEP. It's on 808. And if I pop back to the agenda just quickly, we do have in the Kubernetes Slack, if you're interested, we have the Kubernetes dual stack channel on Kubernetes Slack, and there's a link to the Kubernetes Discuss as well. So are there any questions about that? Alrighty, moving on to SIG update. So our first SIG update today is from SIG Storage, and we should have Saad Ali on the line, chair of SIG Storage. Hand it over to you, Saad.
Yep, I'm here. Let me go ahead and share my screen and we can get started. Okay, can you see my screen okay?
We see it, thank you.
All right. All right, so let's jump right into it. What did SIG Storage deliver for 1.14? So these were, there's a lot of things that SIG Storage works on. If you're interested, we have a spreadsheet that we use to keep track of all the features, bugs, design docs that we're working on each quarter. These were kind of the highlights from the last release. The big one was local persistent volumes being moved to GA. Local persistent volumes are a volume plugin, just like any other persistent volume plugin that we have. The difference here is that it allows a disk that is local to the node to be used as a persistent volume. For those of you who are familiar with host path, you may be wondering, oh, well, what's the difference from host path and this? What's the difference between just exposing a directory versus this new local PV concept? And the big difference is that the Kubernetes scheduler natively understands local PVs and can ensure that any workloads that are using a particular local PV are always scheduled back to the same node. So that it's native concept within Kubernetes, whereas with host path, you could have the pod rescheduled to a different node and end up with essentially data loss. And so this feature has gone GA. The benefits or the use cases for this feature are cases where you want to optimize for performance over durability, assuming you have a database or something that handles replication at the application layer, and you want very high performance. You could use something like a local SSD using this feature. So we're very excited to have that move to GA. There was also a blog post put out on Kubernetes IO explaining this, and some folks that are already using it. Next up is CSI, the Container Storage Interface, that went GA late last year. It is the southbound API for Kubernetes to integrate with third-party block and file storage vendors. And that API is continuing to expand to make sure that we have all the features, basically feature parity with in-tree volume plugins. To that end, we have moved raw block volumes and topology to beta and resizing to alpha. Raw block volumes allows the block device to be exposed inside of a container instead of a mounted file system. Topology is basically the notion that a volume is not equally accessible by all nodes within a cluster, and having a storage system be able to generically express that when it starts up and share that information with Kubernetes, so Kubernetes can act intelligently when it schedules or provisions volumes. That's topology. And then finally, resizing is the ability to say, hey, I have a volume, but I'm running out of space. I want to increase the size of this volume. Be able to do that through the Kubernetes interface. So that feature went alpha this last quarter. And then finally, we have a large effort underway to migrate a lot of the in-tree volume plugins to CSI. The motivation here is that we want to remove as much third-party code from the core of Kubernetes as possible. CSI is the extension mechanism for storage. It is GA. So there's two parts to this. One is third parties writing CSI drivers, and then the work being done by SIGs Storage now is basically creating adapters or shims within the core of Kubernetes, such that if someone tries to use one of the in-tree volume plugins, instead of having the business logic for that fulfilled internally, it gets proxied out to the CSI driver. And that way we have one kind of code base instead of two. We reduce the security surface within the Kubernetes binaries. And I think it'll be good for the whole community overall. So an alpha implementation of that shim was created last quarter, and the work is continuing this quarter. And then finally, we have a pluggable end-to-end test framework. A lot of the tests that we have used to be very specific to a specific volume plugin. And what that meant is a lot of volume plugins were left untested. And there was a big effort in the SIG to design a generic pluggable end-to-end test framework such that you could write a set of tests once, write a set of tests once, and then plug in any volume plugin, whether it's a CSI driver or an entry volume plugin. And that work was completed and helped us increase the end-to-end test coverage. Moving on to what we are working on this quarter for the 1.15 release of Kubernetes. The big feature is a continuation of the migration of in-tree volume plugins to CSI. We're attempting to move that functionality to beta. At this point in the quarter, it looks like we may end up keeping it in alpha, but there's a significant amount of work that's being done here to make sure that all the different APIs that we expose in tree have a way to be able to be essentially shimmed out to a CSI driver. Again, once this work is complete, the CSI drivers will fulfill the request instead of in-tree, and the success metric here is a little bit weird in that if users don't notice, we have succeeded. Next up, CSI features are continuing to, we're continuing to work on them to make sure that they are in feature parity with what we have in tree. We're planning to move resizing to beta this quarter. And in fact, actually, based on the KEP review, it looks like it may end up remaining in alpha. That's still up in the air. Then we have ephemeral inline volumes. We want CSI to be able to be used not just for remote persistent volumes, but also for local ephemeral volumes. And you can think of this as, if you're familiar with For example, secret volumes or config map volumes that are built into Kubernetes. We want folks to be able to write similar types of volumes using CSI. That is already possible today, but the interface is a little bit janky because you have to create a PVC in order to use it, and doing so for something like a secret volume is a little bit weird. So specifically for ephemeral volumes, we want to allow those volumes to be able to be defined inline in the pod definition. So that functionality is under development as alpha this quarter. Next up is volume capacity and usage metrics. This API already exists, and for internal entry volumes, it allows users to be able to get information about how much space they're using on a given volume, and we need to make sure that we wire that through for CSI as well. Next up is snapshots and cloning. The interesting thing to note here is both snapshots and cloning are only going to be available through CSI. CSI is kind of our future interface that we're building everything into. Whereas the previous set of features are more about bringing feature parity to CSI, these are about extending the Kubernetes storage layer in CSI with more functionality. And so snapshots was introduced as alpha a couple of quarters ago, and we're continuing to revise and improve it. So one of the big things that we're working on this quarter is how we can introduce the ability to have basically pause and resume hooks so that we could do application level consistency, application level consistency instead of crash consistency. We're working with folks in SIG apps on a design for this. So stay tuned for that. There's a KEP out actually, if you're interested, take a look. The second part of this is volume consistency groups. So snapshots currently is single volume snapshot. So you get crash consistency at a single volume level. We're also beginning to design what a multi-volume consistency group would look like and what snapshotting that consistency group would look like. So you get multi-volume crash consistency through the Kubernetes API. And then next up is volume cloning. So instead of having to take a snapshot and restore that snapshot into a new volume, some storage systems enable you to take a running volume and just immediately duplicate a copy on write copy of that volume and create a new volume off that. And so we're working on an alpha implementation that enables you to trigger that functionality through the Kubernetes API. And then finally, we are designing volume attachment limits or redesigning it. This feature already exists in Kubernetes as beta, but we are running into some issues, especially with CSI, so we're trying to redesign it to make sure it works well with CSI as well. The feature here is a lot of storage systems have limitations in numbers in terms of how many volumes can be attached to a given node. And we need to make sure that the scheduler is aware of this information and is able to keep track of it so it can make intelligent scheduling decisions instead of over-scheduling a single node and ending up with pods that are not able to get started because their volumes can't be attached. That is all that these are the highlights of what we're working on with 115. There's a lot more that's going on. If you're interested, join us in the storage SIG, and you can find out more. We also have a number of presentations coming up at KubeCon Barcelona. Monday of the KubeCon week, there is a Cloud Native Storage Day. If you are interested in registering, take a look at the KubeCon website, and you can find the information there. And then we have a number of presentations from folks in SIG Storage about storage, especially on Wednesday, which will be the storage day. And then there is a tutorial on Tuesday for folks who are interested in figuring out what does stateful workload deployment on Kubernetes look like. It'll walk you through the process of creating stateful sets and PVCs and all of these things. And then finally on Thursday, we're going to have an intro and deep dive session for the storage SIG. The intent of this is to give folks who are brand new to the SIG information about what we do, how to get involved, as well as an overview of some of the big projects that we're currently working on. So if you're going to be in Barcelona and you're interested, please check that out. And then finally, we have our meetings every 2 weeks. You can go to our community page to find out more about that. Feel free to add to our agenda doc. The notes are linked there, and you can always ask us questions on our Slack channel or our mailing list. And that is all I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Saad. Is there any questions for SIG Storage? Okay, that brings us to SIG Docks update. Do we have Zach Cordlayson on the line, or anybody from SIG Docks?
This is Jennifer Rondo. I'm a co-chair of the SIG, and I haven't heard from Zach, who said that he would deliver, but we work on the slides together, so I can go ahead and present unless Zach speaks up now and says, me.
I say go for it, Jennifer.
Okay.
You have the floor.
Okay, let me share my screen. And attempt to present. Okay.
We see it. Fantastic.
Okay. Now we'll just have to see how well my keyboard interaction works. We more or less work according to release cycles, but we also tend to think in terms of like actual quarters of the year, which are only an approximate sort of mapping. So we did indeed release the 114 docs. Jim Angel was the release lead for the docs on 114. He did a brilliant job, and we are deeply grateful to him. He has also spearheaded some really great additional write-up of the role. And with every release, we're getting better about documenting the responsibilities for the docs lead for the release. So we've made really major strides there. Localization is taking off like crazy. It feels to me like every single time I check in on the channel, we've got another team anxious to translate the Kubernetes docs into yet another language. So yeah, I mean, almost 7 means we've got 1 in the works, but the team isn't actually completely spun up to start checking in localized content yet. But that is going really swimmingly, and it seems as though it's a good example of nothing succeeds like success. We're starting to do different things with documenting the process of localization, because the localizing teams are some of our biggest contributors now, both in the English content as well. When they hit translation issues, we get stuff fixed in the original English as well as in the translated content. So that is contributing significantly to the overall quality of the docs for everybody. We're also working on, I think with some success, creating, sort of defining more roles within SIG Docks, so that we can bring new contributors on board more effectively and give them more different kinds of opportunity to contribute. The role of issue triage captain, for example, came out of some new contributors' interest in finally helping get through our sadly neglected issue backlog. So the entire repo is starting to look a lot nicer. I'll say a little bit more about some of this in subsequent slides, I think. And we've also got this focus group kind of moving into the status of a working group, looking specifically at security content, at how to organize the content better within the doc site, and also how to develop parts of it, and also how to reach out to other SIGs to work on improving the content and help folks develop general sort of better security practices around managing their clusters. It's some, but not all Kubernetes, right? We finished our SIG charter. We've there are a number of projects are interested in subdomain hosting on Kubernetes. Kind is the only one that comes to mind at the moment, but we've had a few others as well. I think kubectl was maybe looking at this option also. In any case, that was a bit of, well, it was partly just setting up communication appropriately so that folks who want subdomain hosting have expectations set appropriately, and so that the work of maintaining subdomains doesn't fall entirely on the main SIG. Our review and planning meeting for the quarters was held at the end of March, I think. Our first attempt at a remote meeting for this work, and we've made pretty decent progress already early in Q2 on implementing the stuff that we've planned. There's links to the notes in the slides, so I'm not going to go into detail there. We're also looking at getting more dedicated technical writers hired to work on specific ongoing problem areas in the docs. The pick the right solution setup docs have been a pain point for the SIG since I joined it 2 years ago. And so we're trying to get resources more appropriately allocated there. A major focus is mentorship. The new contributor ambassador role is an important part of this, and the path from new contributor to approver is one that we're trying both to document and to make easier, so that folks can see where they can go from first pull request, correcting a typo, to pinging the right tech reviewers for big PRs for new release docs, to getting, actually getting PRs merged. So we're making good progress there, and we've got eager volunteers waiting in the wings, which is pretty exciting. Release 115 is coming along. Barney is coming up to speed. He's partly, I believe he shadowed Jim for 114, and Jim is still around to consult and mentor. We'll continue to hold doc sprints at upcoming conferences. Sadly, we will not be holding a doc sprint at Write the Docs because it conflicts with KubeCon Barcelona. So for the first time in several years, Write the Docs will not have a Kubernetes presence. I'll be there, but not as a Kubernetes contributor. And as I already mentioned, issue triage is finally starting to happen because it's really been pretty much scattershot up until this point. So we're looking forward to the results of that effort. Things you should know about the current state of the SIG. I've already mentioned the security content effort. We have a dedicated Slack channel. Zach Arnold is leading it. Feel free to join the channel, ask questions, get involved. That would be great. We also have some staffing limitations coming up, listed on the slide. I started a new position at Stripe the week that we did the planning meeting, so the end of March. And this means that my time is partly taken up more than before with getting up to speed at a new job. I still am supported in my Kubernetes contributions. I'm not stepping down, but I'm not as available as I was. Jared is not available at all through the summer. And Zach is left to pick up all of the slack. Pun not really intended. We are, however, getting shadows up to speed so that on those weeks, we have some of them when none of us is available because both Zach and I are out. And there's a few of those coming up between now and August. We will still have coverage, leadership coverage for the SIG. So this may well also turn into some succession planning, but we're not there yet. The Kubernetes blog, this is actually pretty big. The Kubernetes blog is now an official sub-project of SIG Docks. Caitlin Barnard, who's been an amazing contributor to the KDash Docks up until this point, is going to be taking point on that project. And we can't wait to get things like fully sort of ramped up. We've had a fair number of hiccups with blog contribution reviews, and this should make the whole process of getting blogs through from initial submission to final publication considerably smoother. So, how to contribute? We have excellent documentation on contributing to the docs. It continues to be improved, but Misty Linville was the first person to really create better pages for that, and she deserves a shout out whenever the question of contributing to the KDash Docks comes up, because those pages really make it a lot easier to understand what to do. We have a few projects, GitHub projects set up to reflect some of the planning that we've done in our planning meetings. So you can sort of follow along there. And as always, we welcome fixes to the docs in pull requests. In spite of our new issue triage, a PR is still the quickest way to get something fixed. We don't need to run everything through the issue workflow. So here's where to find us. Jared does seem to be appearing occasionally on Slack, at least this week. I don't know how available he will continue to be. I monitor reasonably regularly, and so does Zach. So you can reach us there or on any of the public channels. And that's what I've got. Any questions?
I think that's a wrap. Thank you very much, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Okay, so that concludes our SIG updates. Moving on to announcements. We have no stated announcements on the agenda. I will open up for any other business at the end. We are moving on to the shout-outs for this week. So check out the shout-outs channel in the Kubernetes Slack. If you have anything or to say about wonderful work that people in the community have done to help you or others, feel free to go to the shout-outs and give them a shout-out. Here are some shout-outs from the last week that I'm going to go through. So Paris gives a shout out to Deads2K and Saltish for joining us today for the first Meet Our Contributors session. Tons of great answers to API and CLI contributing questions. Thanks for being mentors. Thank you, Paris. And a shout out from Saltish. A big thanks to Paris and Castro Joe for organizing Meet Our Contributors. So thanks for the shout outs. That brings us to the end of our stated agenda. Do we have any other business or any other questions that people would like to bring to the attention of the community meeting now? No, well, with that, that concludes the weekly Kubernetes weekly meeting. Thank you for joining us and have a wonderful rest of your week.